Hello and welcome to the Gold, Ghosts, and Guns podcast for February 24th, 2025. My name is Tom Luongo. We have a lot to talk about. It is episode 207, and I have with me Peter St. Onge, and we're fellow Austrian, libertarian, yada, yada, yada. Peter's great. I think he's hilarious. He does a video every morning on Twitter that I generally get a chance to listen to, that I'm always fascinated by. But it was funny, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was scrolling through Twitter, and Peter's morning video was about the possibility of Trump getting rid of the income tax and replacing it with tariffs. And I had only just begun to think through that possibility when he hit me with that. And I'm like, oh, Peter, you have to be on the podcast. We have to talk about that. So it's been a while since you and I last talked. How have you been? Are you enjoying season 2 of the Trump show? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on, Tom. And this season has been insane. Usually sequels are worse, and usually second terms of presidencies are generally pretty useless.
Yeah.
And, of course, this one has been like 10x what it was. And you remember last time around, right?
Mm-hmm.
When Trump first came into office, his first 100 days were just hyper, right? I mean, like every day you would wake up being like, wow, what the heck did he do today? And this has been that on steroids. And, I think what's going on with Democrats right now is that they really, really regret stealing 2020. Right? Trump is pissed off, man. He's got his mugshot on the freaking wall. I think when he came in, he had a bunch of kind of Republican, old school Mitt Romney types who, showed him around. They were like, this is how it works in Washington. And, it's easy to get intimidated by it all, right? You got the buildings, you got the history, and you got the Resolute desk and all that. And so I think first time around, he was kind of going along with them. And he was like, okay, I see. That's how it's done in Washington. And now, at this point, he's had 4 years. He's been persecuted what's the last president that they went after this way? Probably the worst in American history. Even Andrew Jackson, they didn't attack, they didn't try to put him in prison. So at this point, his eyes are wide open. He understands these people are gangsters. Trump had years of dealing with the unions in New York, right? If you want to get a government or a building up in Manhattan, you got to deal with unions, you got to deal with local politicians, and both of those are very, very close to the mafia in many ways,
Yes.
right? So Trump knows how to deal with those people. And I think when he first came in, he had in his mind that, this is Washington. These are honorable gentlemen. And at this point, no, he knows who he's dealing with. He's dealing with gangsters.
Mm-hmm. And I've been calling him Don Trump Leone, actually, because he's running the government now. He's been holding court down in Mar-a-Lago since, to be honest with you, a month before the election. And everybody's having to kiss the brass ring. The only thing I haven't done yet is make a meme of him sitting there stroking the cat. I have a Powell meme of that, right? And so you want lower interest rates, you say, okay. But yeah, the Trump doing the Marlon Brando thing has been pretty hilarious, and I find it, I think that's the best way to look at it. He understands that this has always been. We've been saying this as libertarians for years, that the government is just mafia and bad and costumes and badges. Like it's not much different. So we're now finally watching it play out in real time.
Oh, and you gotta love, you look at the deal he's got with Zelensky at the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, he rolls in and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna want 500 billion, or we can't be friends anymore. And without U.S. support, Ukraine crumbles, right? So,
Right.
it's very much like, nice country you got here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. And it's nice for once that that's coming from us, right? Every
Right.
country. I remember when we invaded Iraq back in 91. I remember Turkey, we had to fly over Turkey, right? And so
Right.
Turkey was extorting all this, we're going to need a ton of money, we're going to need, special favors on this and that. At the time I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, Turkey only exists as an independent country because of our security umbrella. What the hell is this dictating terms? But that's how it's been, right? Every pissant country in the world has been ordering America around. You got to be joking. So Trump understands leverage. He understands negotiation.
Yeah.
And it turns out we have a crap ton of leverage on every single country on earth, right? Because the trade is so unequal. You take Canada, 1/5 of Canadians, they work building stuff for export to the US. In other
Hmm.
words, if Trump closes the border, you have overnight like 30% unemployment in Canada. That is Great Depression level.
Yes.
Mexico, it's even higher. It's like 40%,
Hmm.
right? Why? These countries get to tell the US what to do?
Right. Now it's funny you say that, right? Because I don't know if you caught the Marco Rubio interview with Kathleen Herridge over the weekend, because he mentioned this. He said it's like she asked him about this whole Canada becoming the 51st state thing, and he said, and Rubio let it out. He said, well, it happened during Trudeau's first meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Again, Don Trump holding court at Mar-a-Lago says, Trudeau comes in begging Trump not to put tariffs on him. He said, like, if you put tariffs on Canadian goods, then we won't have a country anymore. And Trump just kind of looked at him and went, well, if you can't be a country without cheating on trade, then maybe you should become a state. That was his
Cheating on
exact. That's
trade?
yeah.
Yeah,
And Rubio was in the room, and Rubio was like,
yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah.
like, and then it just went from there. And when you start tying like Canada into like Mexico is clearly taken over, is clearly in the pay of the cartels and the WEF. On Canada, it's split between the WEF and the British Crown. They've got massive problems there. But before I don't want to go into that. I didn't bring you on here to listen to me rant about the fucking Bank of England, even though it's a lot of fun. Trust me on this, but I can do that off camera to my four walls and my poor dog. What I do actually want to talk to you about, again, let's go back to the inciting incident for this podcast, which is um, the idea of tariffs being a means by which to end the income tax, because I think that's something that it's not just this is something that everybody would like. And it's kind of timely, seeing it's the end of February and everybody's now starting to gather all their materials together, start filing their taxes, start. It's so awful, and it's on
Oh, yeah.
everybody's mind right now. So
Yeah, so this is something that Trump brought up during the campaign, and he floated specifically replacing the income tax with tariffs. And first time I heard about it anyway was on the Joe Rogan show.
right.
And Trump talked about how the economic golden age of America was in the late 1800s, right before we had the income tax and also the Fed, right? The income tax and the Fed
Mhm.
both came at the same time, 1914. So that's, first of all, that's impressive because very few presidents understand that, right? That's a point I've been making for years that I call it the top hat singularity, but we had this era, just the absolute golden age, really in every single respect. Like every single thing that Elon is working on right now. Okay,
Mhm.
rockets, EVs, Neuralink, his what's his tube, his evacuated
Oh,
tube.
right, right, right,
Okay,
right. Carbon nanotubes.
God, what the heck is that? Anyway, every single one of those was invented between the 1870s and the 1890s. Like
Mhm.
everything in modern society was built in this golden age. It's almost like the Romans rediscovering, or the Middle Ages rediscovering ancient Greece, this
Mhm.
era when technology was in many ways more advanced. We have been floating on like the fumes of the great economy that we had between 1870 and 1890. And why was it so great? Because the federal government was minuscule. It collected, I think it was 1.8% of GDP was the federal
Wow.
take. All right. Today, they take 17%, they spend 24%. All right. Before we had an income tax, the federal government took 1.8. Okay, so it was what, 15 times smaller, and it run a surplus on 1.8%. We had roads, we had military, right? We had,
Mhm.
police. Public safety was probably a good deal better in the 1870s, not least because you could carry a gun anywhere,
Right.
right? So we had this amazing country, and the federal government was one-tenth the size. So when we talk about replacing the income tax, part of it is the economic benefits. And so back of envelope, I estimate that you would raise household income by something like $2,500 a month, right? About half of that is coming from the taxes you don't have to pay. The other
Mhm.
half is coming because our economic growth almost doubles, right?
Mhm.
We go back to that golden age, but that's only part of it, right? So we get much, much richer, yes. But the other part of it is that the federal government collapses, right? They lose
Right.
90%. Well, and I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. We can talk about what
Right.
happens immediately, but it puts it on this path to getting back to that golden age, tiny little federal government that consumed a tenth or 15th of what it does today. So, in terms of how do you get from here to there, right? So the income tax today collects about 2.5 trillion,
Hmm.
and tariffs collect something like 100 billion or 200 billion. So Trump is talking about bumping that, he wants to put 20 or 30% tariffs on everybody. His go-to seems to be that when he's upset with you, he talks about 25% tariff. So whatever that number happens to be, we would be looking at most maybe another trillion in tariff revenues. That would bring it to about 1.25 trillion
Hmm.
compared to the income tax, which is 2.5 trillion. And so the only downside, if you could even call it a downside, is
Sure.
that you'd have to reduce government spending, federal government spending by about 1.25 trillion. Now, how do you get there? Well, the federal government has long before Elon, the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, and the GAO, which is like the accounting
Right.
organization, the Fed, they have long estimated that there's about 500 billion in waste in federal spending. That's just waste because they're not allowed to have opinions about fraud because that would be a serious issue, right? Like if they actually estimate there's 100 billion in fraud, then prosecutors might want to follow up and then it gets
Right.
messy. So 500 billion in waste, and that's long before Elon. Okay, that's before we found out about, what is it, Sesame Street in Iraq, about the transgender operas in Peru, that, almost the entire aid budget is a slush fund. We've been
Hmm.
giving hundreds of millions to the Taliban, allegedly for, female education when that's illegal. Yet we keep sending the checks. So when you put in what Doge is finding, I think it's actually reasonable between the fraud and the waste that we could be looking at closer to 1 trillion. If you're
Easily.
at 1 trillion, you're within spitting distance of getting rid of the entire freaking income tax.
Hmm.
Now, remember, right? If the economy is growing, if the economy grows by 20% in the next decade because we don't have an income tax anymore, then tax revenue goes up on everything,
Right.
right? You're importing more because your economy is bigger.
Hmm.
Every single tax goes up. So even that last 250, you probably don't have to cover. Just float it, wait for the
Right.
economy to catch up to you. But even so like Donald Trump, just last week, he said, "I want to reduce tensions with China and Russia because if we can do that, I think we can cut the defense budget by half."
Right. Yeah, that's another 400 or $500 billion on budget. Forget the off budget stuff.
Bingo, on budget. Who knows how much off budget? Right?
And
Yeah.
then
Mhm.
so just to interject here real quick because
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw it, but it just hit the wire. Um, Rand Paul's talking about it. We're sending foreign aid to China.
Yeah.
We're sending foreign aid to China, as Rand Paul put it, for China to buy our debt to pay us back and then pay them interest on the money that we borrowed in order to give them foreign aid. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
how insane the whole thing is. So, I mean, I think that's probably the most emblematic. Forget all the DEI stuff and the transgender bathrooms in Namibia or
Right.
whatever the hell else we're
Right.
paying for. It's that one right there, which completely undercuts like the whole Steve Bannon fake Republican wing of the MAGA movement because those guys just work for MI6 anyway. But I don't know. I don't want to go. I don't want to go there today. Well, I kind of just did, but so yeah, like the numbers make a lot of sense here. So now, just to make sure everybody understands what we're dealing with, the government spends $6.7 trillion, right, or something like that. I've been
Yep.
long saying that, hey, why don't we go back to the COVID budget of 2019, which was $4.7 trillion. Like
Yep.
we can do that, or what?
Yeah.
And the deficit is literally just the money that the Biden administration was shitting out the door in order to pay for all this other nonsense. We get to
Yep.
there. Where's the other $2.5 trillion come out of the budget?
Oh, for sure. Right. So, a lot of that comes out of
Or where does the rest of the revenue come from? Because I don't actually, I mean, we all talk about cutting the budget and everything else. I mean, just to go through chapter and verse, Peter, like break down like where all the revenue comes from. Because I, be honest with you, I'm like, I don't even like look at those numbers myself. But so what corporate taxes bring in how much, or they're not part of the income tax bill. That's just personal income tax is what we're talking about with a little over $1 trillion, $1.25 trillion, right? So
yeah, yeah, most of it is income tax, payroll tax. So that's Social Security. Social Security is actually not that bad because it's a flat tax. It's
right.
a flat tax up to,
A certain
whatever.
level, right? 125, 137,000 or so. I think that's the number right
Yeah, so here, I just hit Grok. Elon
now.
Musk. fantastic new AI. Okay, individual income tax, 49% of revenue, so that's about well, it's about 2.5 trillion. Payroll taxes, about 36%. Corporate income tax, about 9%, and then everything else is 6%. So 6% comes to, what's that, about 150 billion?
Right.
Uh, I'm sorry, 200, closer to 300 billion.
Right.
And so that's going to include gasoline and tobacco, right? They have special federal taxes on those, customs duties, tariffs,
Sure.
estate and gift tax, and then miscellaneous fees.
Mhm.
Uh, Normally, it would have included about 100 billion or 70 billion from the Federal Reserve, but of course, the Federal Reserve is no longer giving,
Right.
a vig over to Treasury.
They're losing money right now. Yeah.
Yeah, they're about a quarter trillion in the hole. So,
Mhm.
right, the vast majority of it is either individual income tax, payroll tax, corporate. And on those, in terms of economic growth, the absolute worst ones for economic growth are going to be corporate income tax.
Mhm.
Those are just nuclear weapons. They're extremely popular because, your median voter wants to soak the rich. But the thing is that rich people, the more you tax them, okay, especially on profits or on capital gains, the more you tax them, the more money they're going to put into yachts.
Yes.
Okay, so if you've got very low taxes on rich people, then they're going to invest their money, right? They're going to put it in the stock market, and then it's going to go fund new companies. They're going to put into venture capital or into equity, private equity. They're going to,
Right.
fund new entrepreneurs. All right, so with zero tax, the billionaires become essentially pass-throughs,
Yes.
where they get the money because they invented a better mousetrap, and then they essentially put all that money back to work growing the rest of the economy because they want to
Yep.
diversify out of their main company. On the other hand,
Right.
if you tax the rich very high, you actually get more yachts, right? You
Yes.
get more waste, you get more beautiful, Gulfstream airplanes and all this. Why? Because it's going to be taxed if they invest it. So
Mhm.
we see this in Europe, where Europe has extortionate taxes on rich people. And what do rich Europeans do? They go to St. Bart's, they go to the Riviera, they have these beautiful property. They're not investing it because it'll just get taxed away. So why take on the risk? So anyway, corporate income tax is the absolute worst. You're talking maybe about 400 billion there. And then the individual income tax, right? And
Mhm.
again, the problem with the individual income tax is that half of the country doesn't really pay it,
Right.
right? It's only the top half. And even there, I don't remember the exact numbers, but like the top 10% pay almost like 80% of the tax or
Right.
something. And
Mhm.
so again, that encourages them to not work, to not take risks. They'll put their money into bonds, like government bonds, instead of starting a new venture,
Mhm.
because if you make money, you're gonna, get taxed whatever 40% of it. If you lose
Right.
money, the government's not going to give you 40% back, right? So that's an asymmetric gamble there. Imagine if you go to the casino, right? If you,
Yep.
and like if you lose, then you lose a lot more, and if you win, the casino takes half of it. Well, you're not going to play. So the individual income tax, and then the one that personally I would keep. I know it's not popular, but the one that I would keep is the payroll tax, assuming that we need some form of government. We can debate that. I have a metaphor that I
Mm.
love. Like when I'm talking about anarcho-capitalism. All right, here, I'm gonna lay it out. Okay, so I'm an anarcho-capitalist, right? I think that the state is evil. It is a stationary bandit, right? As
Yep.
the Manker Olson's framing. So it
Right.
basically occupies you, and it basically enslaves you, right? And
Right.
it takes it.
I agree with you morally.
Yeah,
Practically.
morally.
Right.
But then you've got another side of it, which is we live in a real world, right?
Mhm.
And so so my metaphor for the state is a lion. Okay. So male lions don't do anything. They sit around all day. They sun their nuts. They don't hunt. They don't cook. They don't clean. They don't take
Yep.
care of the kids. They do nothing. All right. It's the girls who do everything. The girls go hunting.
Mhm.
Now, when the female lions kill something, at that point, the boy lion gets up, he walks over, he snarls at them. Maybe he'll bite them, he'll give them a little
Mhm.
nip to get them out of the way, and then he eats the choicest parts. And
Yep.
then he goes back and takes a nap. All right. However, so why do the girl lions put up with it? Right? Why don't they just chase him off? And the reason, of course, is that there are other male lions in the world.
Yes.
And his one job is to protect the babies from the other male lion.
Yep.
Because without a male, the other one will show up, he'll chew up the babies, and he'll make brand new babies.
Yep.
Right? So this is government. All right. It's fat, lazy, useless. It has one job, which is to keep away the other governments. So
Mhm.
accepting, that takes you to sort of more of a Milton Friedman minarchist position where,
Sure.
you need a legal system, you need some kind of military, a defensive military, not an offensive military. So in light of that, I'm the least bad taxes are probably tariffs and payroll taxes. And if you look back to the pre-income tax government, right? You look back to the 1913 size of the federal government. I mean, 1.8% of GDP, that's about 400 billion. We
Right.
could fund that with today's tariffs.
Yes. Yes.
You wouldn't even have to get close to having to take anything out of Social Security. So I think it's absolutely doable. The swamp will fight this with everything, of course. I mean, this is
Right.
life and death for them.
Well, it's also life and death for all the grifters who live overseas at our expense.
Yeah.
Like this is the big one, and we're finding that out every time a member of this administration opens its mouth on the world stage, and we find out that we don't have shared values with the Europeans anymore. We don't have shared value with the Brits. We don't have shared values with any of these people. I was just talking to my we have a Dexter White and I have a morning meeting every Monday morning. Sometimes to actually do business and sometimes just to catch up. And we were talking about this, like there are so many of these basic lies, these conflations of America with Europe in order to keep us like in this weird headspace where we all have shared values, like Anglo-American, Judeo-Christian, Western values. These are all perversions of the languages these fucking commies use in order to enslave us to their will and keep us chained to that old system of institution privilege and their old class system. And I'm just over. I've been over it for most of my adult life, but now I kind of really understand it that way. And they're the ones who are complaining the worst because they're the ones who have been the ones putting those people in charge of our government to make sure that their gravy trains are fully stocked. Well,
Yeah.
those are all ending. Before the election, just off the top of my head, I'm like, think about how much money we send overseas. At least $1 trillion. It's
Yeah.
probably closer to two. And the big argument against cutting government spending a lot is, it'll be recessionary for GDP. GDP will go down because GDP is 25% or government spending is 25% of GDP. I'm like, okay, well, that's nice, but understand we can just cut out the money going overseas. The money going
Yeah.
overseas has an SG&A cost through our government, meaning there's a bunch of women at desks pushing papers and writing checks. That's the SG&A cost on the money. What is that, 7%? Like we can put those people on the unemployment roll, pay them for a year, and then cut all that other stuff out. And now you've cut out $1.9 trillion from the budget. Like this is money
Yeah.
that's not going overseas, and then liquefying the Eurodollar markets for them to turn around and think that they have control over the price of our money.
Yeah, you've got the money going overseas. Another one that I really like. So this is a study from Christina Romer, who's a prominent left-wing economist, by the way. And this has actually been duplicated. For every dollar they collect in tax, it destroys 2 to 3 additional dollars in in prosperity, in GDP specifically. And the reason that's happening is because of the incentives destruction that raising the money encouraged people to work less. And so you ended up losing. So, if we take kind of a case study of this, so if you look at Argentina, Malay cut I think around 6 or 6.5% of GDP worth of central government spending. Now, they produce the GDP numbers, right? Statists, pro-government people define GDP so that GDP numbers include government spending. Now, most regular people, right, when they hear GDP, they think of it as prosperity. Like I just used it as a synonym for prosperity because that's roughly what it means. However, there are a couple of quirks in GDP, and one of them is exactly that. It counts government spending. So if the government is wasting 150 billion giving crap to illegals who shouldn't even be here, they're criminal fugitives, then that counts as GDP. That counts as us having produced something. And so if you stop giving that 150 billion to the illegals, which has zero benefit for the American
Oh,
people,
well,
right?
other than Walmart's bottom line, apparently.
Well, but even there, I mean,
I know.
they're
I'm
yeah,
kidding, Peter.
yeah, they're like using up resources that could have gone to Americans, right?
Agreed.
And, Yeah, exactly. And so on paper, getting rid of that 150 is going to reduce GDP. But of course, in terms of wealth, it's going to increase it. And
Mhm.
this is kind of a larger question that I mean, I would much rather that we look at national wealth.
Right.
That's what matters,
Yes.
not
Well,
GDP.
I've long said that GDP should be renamed gross national
Yep.
spending. It talks nothing
Yeah,
about the quality of
right.
that spending.
Exactly.
So somebody said to me the other day, it's like this is the perfect libertarian talking point, or the perfect,
Mhm.
actually not even libertarian point. This is the perfect talking point for people who for status, actually anti-leftist status. So if you have sex with a girl on OnlyFans, it's GDP positive. But if you have sex with your wife, it's not GDP accretive. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I mean, unless you're putting your wife on OnlyFans, yeah, but
Well,
gotta,
yeah,
yeah, no, you gotta work that out ahead of
well,
time.
yeah,
Yeah, you
that's
can't
between
just
you and her.
yeah.
But hey, what you do in the privacy of okay. But that's the basic idea here. Like, look,
Correct.
like it's like the old thing about when Marion Barry ran, the former mayor of DC ran for reelection after being convicted of uh, of trafficking cocaine or whatever it was. And he said,
Yeah.
our idea was in the first campaign speech was no hookers, no blow, just good government, right? And so it's the same basic idea here. We're talking about how much money do we send to the cartels, how much money do we send to China, how much do we send to illegals, and all of this is quote unquote part of GDP, but it's not part of
Right.
building wealth. So now ask yourself, in that $27 trillion with the nominal GDP, how much of that is actually wealth generating spending, and how much of it is
Right.
wealth destructive spending?
Exactly.
Because that conspicuous consumptive spending takes money from the pool of real savings and diverts it to hookers and blow, as opposed to rebuilding bridges or educating our children or any of the, or just building widgets, or throwing rockets up into the sky and catching them, which is what,
Right.
what we can actually do when given any just a little bit of freedom. So
Right. Remembering how much of it is productive, and of course, remembering that every dollar that government spends actually costs what, $3 to $4
freedom,
total.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a huge loss. And the example you gave of the girlfriend versus the wife, so that's actually a live issue. Like when they talk about women entering the workforce,
Mm.
right? So, if a woman is taking care of her kids at home, let's
Mm-hmm.
say she might be homeschooling, and she's probably giving them a much better education. This is how farms used to raise the next generation back in the day, right? You didn't,
Right.
back in 1850, you probably didn't have a schoolhouse in your Nebraska farm. And
Right.
farm kids did not turn out, they weren't like rampaging through, 7-Elevens or anything. I mean, they were pretty upstanding people. So apparently it worked. But anyway, so if you've got a wife homeschooling, she doesn't have a job, she shows up as zero GDP. On the other
Mm-hmm.
hand, if she sends the kids to school, if she sends them to daycare, and then she goes and get a job, that's a ton of GDP there, right? You
Yes.
got, what is it, about 16,000 is what public schools cost per year. You would think they'd be better, but anyway, 16,000 per student. Maybe you got childcare on top of that, depending on the age of the kid, because they got to bridge the time until mom gets off work. And then, of course, you got the work that she's doing over there, which is paid. So you put all that together, and on paper, it looks like the economy just soared.
Yes.
But again, that's all on paper, right? When you look at it in terms of the wealth, right? And you count things like being able to spend time with your kids. You look at things like how do the kids turn out? Are they able
Mm-hmm.
to do math, for example? Do they have good characters? I mean, it's just a massive wealth destruction, probably the single biggest.
Yes.
And I mean, of course, there are some women who enjoy working. They gain,
Right.
just like men, they gain a sense of accomplishment, and that as part of their
Right.
self-image. But in terms of the many, many women who would rather be home, say farming in the backyard, have some chickens. I
Mm.
mean, this is pretty appealing for a lot of women as opposed to, working at, like McDonald's. So in terms of them, GDP soared,
Yeah.
wealth collapsed.
Yep. Agreed. It's a really good point, and it's the way we have to reframe this. It's why I've been screaming about GDP as a just a terrible and an absolutely terrible statistic, and yet it's the only one we have for years. And I'm like, no, don't argue. So anytime I hear one of our peer group talking about how well this would be GDP negative, I literally have to like not scream at them in public because I'm so angry about it. Because it's like, dude, fuck off with wasteful gross national spending. What are we doing? We're
Yeah.
just going to turn the entire country into the government, and then we're just
Right.
going to finance it at 7%. I mean, the truth of the matter is, how about we do this? Even if you take that argument as a baseline and say, okay, fine, but then for that $27 trillion worth of GDP, we're spending 7% more than we take in revenue. So
Yeah.
actually, in order to decide what our GDP actually is, excuse me, we have to at least cut the budget deficit off the top.
Oh,
At a
yeah.
minimum, just cut it off the top. It's not part of the equation because
Yeah.
we don't have any wealth generated from. I mean, it's retarded. It's absolutely, and we're allowed to use that word now. It's beneficial. I think Trump actually signed the executive order. So
I had a debate with my wife if we were ever going to recapture that word. And she says, no, we've never recaptured a word again. And by gum, Trump and Elon did it. So, yep, we can't say
to be honest with you, Steve, it's funny. Peter, it's funny. Years ago at my weekly board gaming group, I would sit there and I like the only old base guy, and there were a bunch of like middling, millennial, frankly, gay guys around me. And I was sitting there one night, and we were playing a new game, and the rule came up, and I didn't like the rule. I'm like, that rule's retarded. And this guy just looked at me and said, "Don't say that word." I'm like, "Excuse me?" And he's like, "Don't use that word." I'm like, "No, I will use that word. That rule's retarded. And you telling me that I'm not allowed to use the word retarded is retarded." It's your turn.
That's beautiful.
And then I was like, your turn,
Yeah.
go. Like,
Yeah.
that was 2017. And I refused to give up the word retarded. I'm like, no,
Yeah,
I'm not.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, there's some other words. We can't say them quite yet, so we won't get into it. But yes, there's a
Yeah,
whole
we're not.
list of
Let's
words
talk about those.
that I'm hoping we're going to recapture. The
Well,
mere
yeah,
fact I'm afraid to mention them signals that
well,
they are not.
the truth of the matter is that even George Carlin in 1981, when he did the whole list of words,
Oh
right,
yeah,
yeah, with the scroll at the end of Carlin and Carnegie, some of those words were not on that list, and
yeah.
that was George Carlin's list. So.
Yep.
So, all right. So, where do we go from here? So, we've established we don't need an income tax.
Yes.
And so, what are we looking at now? Like, and let's think about this now in terms of our foreign position. I think because I think the most significant thing that's really come up in the last couple of weeks was one. I think you brought it up before we hit record. Was Vance's speech at Munich, and I think the one at Paris was almost as consequential. And then what's going on at the UN today? We're recording this. The United States, for the first time since the war started, sided with the Russians on saying no to make a UN resolution to condemn Russia for invading Ukraine. I don't know if you saw that or not.
No, I didn't see that. That's interesting.
That happened about 2 hours ago.
How many other countries voted with the U.S.?
There were 18 that said no.
Huh.
And it was the U.S., Russia, and 16 others. I didn't really look at the list because after U.S. and
Israel,
Russia,
El Salvador,
who cares?
Yeah.
And, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
There are other countries. There are other countries other than those three that matter.
Yeah. Are there other countries?
There's the UN Security Council, and then there's everybody else. That does not matter. Because what it's telling me is a couple of things. I've been bringing this up in other podcasts that I've been doing, which is that one of the things I think that everybody is having a real hard time dealing with is the end of consensus. Like we have moved what Donald Trump is doing and as running the world, running the United States government, and all of both foreign policy and domestic policy as a mob boss is that he's stripping off the veneer of consensus politics and revealing the fact that it was always power politics in the end. It was always about leverage. So if you want to take it from there and run with that, go for it. I think it's a point, and because I think it has real big economic implications for everybody in terms of how it's going to reshape the world. So.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to characterize all these international organizations, whether it's the UN, the IMF, NATO. These are, I think, basically left-wing coups against the country. So Gordon Tullock, right, famous Austrian economist, really he should have gotten the Nobel. James Buchanan got the Nobel, but Tullock wrote that book, Calculus of Consent. Tullock didn't get it because he makes enemies and he speaks frankly. But anyway, Gordon Tullock had been in China during the Chinese Civil War. So he worked for the State Department. He was posted in Tianjin. And he said that being on the ground, he was relatively senior because he had a PhD. So he was part of the planning department for China. And he said that the way it worked is that you had the DoD and you had state. And state was completely left wing. They were effectively communists.
Hmm.
DoD was not. And they negotiated to divide up Asia, right? Just like we divided Europe with the Soviets, DoD and state divided up Asia. So
Okay.
DoD got the islands and state got the mainland.
Hmm.
So that meant DoD had Japan, Taiwan, right? That's the reason they didn't invade, is because that was DoD territory. China was state territory.
Right.
Philippines all the way down, right? So none of those countries had communist revolutions, right? All the mainland ones did. Why? Because state was routing the money to the Chinese communists. So they took U.S. aid going to the nationalists and they shifted that all over to the communists, right? So I think it's important to be clear-eyed that there is a significant chunk of the American government that is explicitly, I guess treasonous would be the term.
Yes.
It absolutely works against us. It is essentially a coup. It's like a partial coup of the government. Those are the guys who set all this garbage up. The UN, the IMF, the World Bank, the whole alphabet soup. And, if you look at it
It's very British.
rationally, so in 1948, the US was about one third of global GDP. Today, it's about one fifth, between a fifth and a quarter. I mean, we are absolutely dominant
Hmm.
in terms of the entire world economy, right? Much, much larger than anybody else. And sorry, I just saw the thumbs up and I was like, wait a minute, what the hell's the thumbs up? Right. So we are much more dominant.
No
And
idea.
so the position that we should have is that we are this massive Goliath
Hmm.
and other countries have to cater to us. Part of the reason throughout history that empires try to get big, right? Constant wars in Europe, wars in Asia, everybody's goal, every king wants to get bigger. Why do you want to get bigger? Because you can throw your weight around and get other
Hmm.
people to do stuff for you that's beneficial for you. So the US, whether it's 1950 or today, we are this absolute dominant country in the world. And the UN, IMF, World Bank, those are designed to dilute our influence. They are designed as basically unions of peons who can then gang up. Like
Hmm.
the UN, every country gets a vote. They'd be
Hmm.
kidding. So we are equal to Namibia?
Right.
That's insane. That's not real politics. That's not how the international relations game works. It is a
Right.
power game. And on the power front, China comes close to our economy, but even there, that economy is feeding what 1.4 billion people. They don't have anywhere near the capacity we do. Europe is a joke. It's in terminal decline. Nobody comes remotely close. So I think we should just get out of the UN. If we pull out of the UN goes from sort of shadow world government to, like the OECD, just yet another talk shop. We pull out, other countries will start pulling out. Israel will almost certainly pull out. Israel has been whipping boy in the UN forever. So countries start pulling out of the UN and it loses its power. There's a lot of countries today, say Japan or Korea, for example, they do everything the UN asks. They dance on the, transgender, policy. They do everything that looks like it's popular in the UN. They're not doing it for the UN. They're doing it because they rely on our unpaid mercenary services. So a lot of the apparent power that the UN has, that is only because we're in the organization. Not just the budget we give it, but the reflected glory, right? Other countries kowtowing to the communists in the UN as an indirect way to curry favor with the US. So I think 100% we should get out. Now, knowing Trump, he won't just pull right out, right?
Mhm.
He'll squeeze them.
Oh, yes.
And
Yes. Yes, he will. Yes,
I'm
he will.
I'm torn, because I'm a huge fan of just giving them the giant middle finger. You could argue it'd be fun just to squeeze them and see how much we can make them dance along the way.
Yeah, well, I think he's certainly doing that to the European Union, and
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
you're you're recounting that part of history about the DoD and state. Listening to that, all I can think of, oh, Mackinder and British foreign policy is like so it makes perfect sense that where the British Mackinderists have the most influences in the Department of State. I think that's pretty freaking obvious. And then it makes sense that you're going to keep Asia divided, weak, and a mess, and a constant threat to Russia's underbelly. Makes perfect sense to me that would be the case. And the DoD was given the task of securing the ring world, which is also in the British interest because they outsourced their maritime power to us. Like, this is the thing that people need to wrap their fucking heads around. The British Empire isn't dead, folks. They've infected us with all of it, and
Yeah.
it's about to end. And I'm telling you, the thing that has been the most most shocking to me. Like, I expected Trump to come in like you. If he got 20% of the stuff he's already gotten done in a month, in 4 years, I would have been ecstatic. I've got all this done because a month before he took office, during the transition, he sends Elon over to then go after Keir Starmer. And I'm like, and now we have this LBMA thing. And now we have this. And now and everywhere I turn, like, Emmanuel Macron is at the White House while we're doing this. And Trump didn't meet him at the door.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a scheduled meeting, but he still didn't even come out to like meet him and walk him inside for a photo op. He's like, I got to deal with this. Now I got to deal with this fucking asshole.
Yeah.
Now I got to deal with this French asshole. And I got the British asshole coming later in the week while Ursula von der Leyen is running around in Kiev, putting up the big, having the big story, and the lights and the pomp and the circumstance about how Ukraine and the EU are one peoples and everything else. And I'm thinking about all the memes that I've seen over the weekend of the map of Europe 100 years ago or pre-World War II. And I'm like, what country's not on this map?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, no offense, Ukrainians, but this is the reality. This has all been a construction in order to continue this process. Now, why this is all important to me and why I want to take it back to what you and I discussed at the beginning of the podcast and why I had you on was because the whole role of the coup of 1913 was to hand us a British style central bank with an income tax system to fund it and a war machine to fund British foreign policy. We got all of those things and 2 world wars to boot. Yeah. And I think that what Trump is literally saying with all of these things is, "Oh, that's over," and I can't be happier. Like, if he breaks a few other things along the way, I don't care.
I agree. I think you've got 2 key dates. One of them is the rise of Bismarck in Germany, and Bismarck really created the modern deep state. And it was explicitly, the idea was that you had these proletariat revolts and peasant revolts and whatnot. And so the idea was tie people to the government, right? Create this welfare state where everybody depends on the government. Now, what that did is it grew the government massively. And at that point, you have this administration that grows up. Now, the way that was translated into the US, Rothbard pins this as sort of the beginning of the end, 1873 Pendleton Act. And what that did was created an independent civil service. And the idea, of course, what they did, they went out and cherry-picked instances of corruption, which government, newsflash, is always corrupt. No matter if it's politically appointed or if it's quote-unquote independent, it will always be corrupt because power attracts corruption. But anyway, they went out and tagged, put all these cases of corruption up in the media. And then they sold Congress on this allegedly independent bureaucracy. Now, if a bureaucracy is independent, who does it answer to, right? And I mean, by design, it answers to nobody. It doesn't answer to the people. So you're not a democracy anymore. Right?
And it doesn't answer to the 3 co-equal branches of government.
Right. And if you look at communism in practice, like in the Soviet Union or in China today, communism in practice is exactly an independent civil service. It is precisely identical to what we have in the US. Ours in the US is maybe not as powerful as it was in the Soviet Union, but they work exactly the same way, right? The idea is that they are independent, they're not corrupt, they are influenced by nobody, they're scientific. That was a big thing in the Soviet Union. They were going to design the family scientifically and all the rest of it, right? I mean, they are exactly the same groups. So that's 1873. That was the Bismarck bargain, grew that. So that's one moment. And then sort of, gradually over the next 40 years, then you had these career bureaucrats. They were still there. They were left over. They're grandfathered in. They were replaced until the point where around about the early 1900s, all of these bureaucracies in rich countries were they were independent, and an independent bureaucracy working for the government is going to be left wing, because the essence of left wingism is government controls things. Government is not corrupt, it's scientific, it has access to the best and the brightest, it's neutral. And so by, say, 1905, 1910, all of these countries, the US, Germany, Britain, all these countries were run by this left wing, basically Soviet style elite. And as you say, 1913 was the coup, right? That's when so the bureaucracy had already been sort of turned evil, and then 1913 was when they made a play to take huge resources from the population. When you put the IRS, i.e. the income tax, when you put that together with what the Fed takes, I mean, you're talking close to half of GDP just from those two actions alone that were taken over to the state. And that really delivered for the West and for the countries that imitate it. That gave us essentially half of a Soviet takeover. I think Reagan called it correctly. As much as I love Reagan, he did not have the fire of Trump. Trump is an absolute force of nature. He puts me to shame. The guy is 78. He speaks at like 5 rallies in like 4 cities in a day. I am humbled.
I know. I know. I know. He exists on McDonald's and Diet Coke and I don't know, vitriol. Like, you know what I mean?
No, it's absolutely shocking. This is also a debate.
Peter, I rewatched the Blues Brothers the other night for the first time in like 20 years. No, he's on a mission from God. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's where I am with him. It's insane. And he does. He puts me to shame. I'm like, dude, I'm tired just healing Skull Mass in World of Warcraft after 2 hours. I'm like, I'm done. I can't do it anymore, dude. I'm done.
You log in at like 3 in the morning and he's got a new policy. I mean, it's completely insane. And as you say, yeah, it's flooding the zone. Like by the time, they react to one outrage and then you got another one coming, and so they got to focus on that. And guess what? They end up giving it a pass because they're just overwhelmed.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. Yeah, but your points about the rise of managerialism in the US. This is, one of the things that Dexter White and I have been I've been like thinking about for the last 6-7 months is coming into the election. Actually, we started last summer of James Burnham's The Managerial State. We both read it and we talked about it a lot. I've embedded it in some of my commentary and some of the writings in the newsletter and whatnot. And we were going down that route because we really thought that there was no way Trump was going to be able to get done what he needs to get done because of the managerial state had taken over. And now we're at the advent of AI and this and that and all of these things. And we were just like, like, dude, I'm like, smoke them if you got them. As much as I think there may be a way out of this, I'm like, realistically speaking, I'm still going to build a house in the middle of the hills of Tennessee. And if I have to, live off grid, because these people are freaking crazy. But what he's done, what's really fascinating, I think, is that what they understood was that Musk and a bunch of 19-year-olds could go in and map in hours what took decades to build, and then truly use the bully pulpit of the public square to break all of this wide open and have the managerial state running for the hills. I think we're really close to the end of tyranny by the HR Karen. I mean, I think we're very close to that because, and this is something else that popped in the conversation the other day, is that having an HR department in corporate America in about 2 years is going to be anti-competitive. You're going to have to get rid of it because, I mean, they may still have them over at, the government agencies, and trying to get government jobs is impossible. But I mean, I'm now dealing with at least 2 or 3 friends. Like 3 friends I've got that all are highly qualified, generally white, and have been unemployed for over a year or marginally employed for over a year. I mean, we're talking project managers or teachers or all of this. And I'm like, how is this possible? It's possible because they're white and the HR Karens are refusing to hire them.
Yeah.
And That's
Yeah,
going to end
well,
very, very quickly, and those people are all going to wind up with lawsuits on their hands. I think a lot of county governments are going to get a real, especially county governments, where a lot of this
yeah.
crap is. And I live north of Gainesville, so I just north of literally communist DNC talking point central for Florida. The DNC is strongest, not in Broward County, not in Leon County. It's in Alachua County, where the University of Florida is, because that's where they're
Which
training the next generation.
which raises another question. Why do taxes fund progressive madrasas, but yeah, college towns tend to be, even in like Wyoming or something, like college
Right.
towns are these oases of
Of
the Soviet Union right
of
there.
idiot
Yeah,
of idiocy.
yeah. So one of the themes that I think a lot of us are talking about is how quickly it flipped.
Yes.
So you've got companies now that are just running away from DEI.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was always shocking. You mentioned the lawsuits. There was a study out that in the 1 year after BLM, something like 6% of hires at Fortune 500s were white. Like two-thirds of the country is white, right? That's a pretty weird, like, unless whites are all, like really, really unqualified, which historically is not the case. That's really freaking weird, right? They have got an absolute tsunami of lawsuits coming their way. But honestly, I'm not surprised it flipped. And okay, so this is a hypothesis that I've been working with. The past couple of years, a lot of people were discouraged because they kept stealing elections. And one point that I kept making, and this is very topical for Europe, which I think is also effectively stealing elections, whether it's stuffing ballot boxes or whether it's controlling the state media. And this. Anyway, so the reason you cheat in an election is so that you can ignore the other side, right? You can ignore the other side's voters. But a funny thing happens, which is that once you start cheating, you can also ignore your own voters
Mm-hmm.
because you guarantee to win, right?
Right.
And every political party is a permanent civil war between the voters of that party and the special interests of that party, who tend to be
Mm-hmm.
activists and donors. The activists get money, so they're, sort of donors slash recipients, in-kind donors. So it's a permanent civil war. And once you start cheating, you ignore your voters. You become a vehicle for the elite in your own party. And I'd been saying this in 2020 when people were standing on the ledge. I said, look, don't worry about it because every time they cheat, the backlash is going to be that much stronger. Because once the cheater is ignoring its own voters, it goes into crazy land.
Yes.
It defines 38 genders. It lets rapists into the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
It does absolutely crazy things. That is exactly what happened during Biden. And what I
Mm-hmm.
think is glorious, like every time there's election in Europe, I actually enjoy it. I know nothing's going to change yet, but what
Right.
it's doing is like building a charge in a battery. And when that thing goes off, so there was a
Yeah.
survey recently that so 20 somethings in America are swinging right. I
Yes.
think Trump lost 20 somethings by like 5 points,
Yeah. It was only five
which,
points.
yeah, historically that was like 25, 30 points because
Right.
they just came out of 12 to 16 years of progressive madrasa, right?
Right.
They were, peak brainwashed. So they only lost them by 5 points, meaning that Gen Z is looking like Gen X on
Mm-hmm.
steroids. I mean, that would be a
Yes.
hardcore right wing. But what's also fascinating is that the numbers are even more extreme in Europe.
Yes, they are.
So young Europeans are swinging so hard right. So, they still have all of these sort of institutional cheats on the side of the left wing elite. But when Europe boils over, I think it's going to make what we're going through right now look minor.
So it's all excellent points. We're doing this the day after the German elections, and we have some
Yep.
interesting demographic data. And I said this to my patrons yesterday for the market report that I do every Sunday morning. I told them, look, this is the most likely outcome. It's what we basically got. Don't expect any change, but what I'm going to be focused on is the demographics, the internals. And what I noted was two things. I was looking at the youth vote because in Saxony, Thuringia, and Brandenburg, in the state elections in the fall,
Yeah. Yeah.
AFD, the kids all voted AFD. Now, in this election, we had a much more interesting divide. Young women all voted Die Linke, the left, the former Communist Party, and all the young men voted AFD.
Wow.
That's a very interesting. Now, we say that that's countrywide. I don't know. Didn't see the breakdowns in East Germany where AfD won versus West Germany where but that's part of the reason why Die, all of a sudden blossomed to 8% right before the election. All the young kids all the young women pushed hard left, but it doesn't matter. Neither the men or the young men or the young women voted for the CDU or the SPD or the Greens. Like the green numbers were exactly the same across all age cohorts between 10 and 12%. And the SPD and the CDU are done. So it'll take a little while for German women to get to grow a brain. But when they grow a brain, they're going to grow that. And it kind of makes sense at this point for them to make that shift. And, I was speaking last week. I was on a podcast with my friend Crypto Rich, and I was on with Dr. Rainer Rothfuss of AfD. And he's like third, and he's an MP in the Bundestag for AfD. And I think he's now like third in line for leadership over there. And we both agreed that what this election was be for Germany would be a referendum on how long it's going to be until Germans finally grow up and come out of that media bubble. They still have a very tightly controlled media. They still have a boomer problem. The boomers all, the German boomers all voted either SPD or CDU, like 70% of them. And so the demographic shift is happening. So what you should expect over the course of the next 2 years in the EU is a massive acceleration of the program to try and make the EU a permanent thing. Fiscal integration, political integration under the European Commission, tax and spend authority, all of it. They're going to make the move for that. And you can see the rumblings of it now with them talking about 700 billion euros in defense spending and blah, 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 blah. They're going to make a big move for this. The monkey wrench in this is going to be, and they're all saying, "Oh, we can weather Trump pulling out of bullshit." You can't weather the United States putting on 30% tariffs on the EU. You can't. You can't.
On 30.
So, tweeted out the other day. So if you guys are going to spend 700 billion euros on building a new military, good luck with that when you have gone to war with all the people who are going to say who fund your supply chains.
Yeah. Yeah, they're talking that for Europe to have the kind of military it needs for its ongoing war with Russia, that they would need 3 trillion, which that's a chunk of change. Remember a couple of years ago there was a video of the German army training with brooms. They were literally using broomsticks, right? That's the state. They have no airlift capacity. They just use us.
Well, Ursula von der Leyen was a defense minister at the time, so she's a witch. So sorry, bad joke.
And it's fascinating, where you're talking about how young German men went for AfD, young German women went for Die Linke. So both of those are anti-establishment. They want to tear it all down.
Right.
And you might they're opposites. The one is communist, the other is right-wing populist. They're opposites in some ways. They of course have overlap. Mm-hmm. But when we look at what happened in the U.S., when people went for Bernie, right? When Democrats turned against their establishment and went for Bernie, that was a half step from Trump. That was like 80% of the way to going for Trump. And that's the horseshoe theory, right? But I think fundamentally, once you take, the red pill, right? Once you start to question the narrative, well, at that point, populism and communism are on an equal footing. Right now, you've opened your mind to these. Yes. Obviously, we're right, they're wrong. So, a lot of people are going to come over. You look at like Bukele in El Salvador, for example. He was literally a former FMLN, which is Marxist. He was literally a former official in that party.
I know.
And he read some books. Okay. And he said, wait a minute, no, this is not how it works.
Got this wrong.
Communists are just as corrupt. They've got terrible economic ideas. So he came hardcore over the populist side. So if young Germans are rejecting the establishment, it's going to be fascinating. And now that takes us to the other point, right? The sort of power grab by the EU. And I think one of the most interesting things over the past decade is the power grab that happened really worldwide with COVID. Mm-hmm. And the way that what I think was happening was that they were winning gradually, and they were doing that by brainwashing every generation, right? You brainwash all the kids, and then you brainwash their kids, right? And every time you're getting, further and further into that hole. which is what happened in the Soviet Union, right? By the time they were done. Um, and so that what I think happened with COVID is that they interrupted this slow process where they really were winning. I mean, you
Oh
remember
yeah.
during, between BLM and COVID, like every organization of substance in the United States had shit to say about, we support, BLM and, you got a mask. You had like the American Association of Actuaries or something, like just, I mean, completely irrelevant. And you're like, what? Why are you weighing it on BLM? Like, what?
Right.
Like, shut
Well,
up and
what?
dribble.
Right.
Yeah, right. And so they were almost taking like a victory tour. They were like
Hmm.
showing off all of the captured weaponry that they had. And yet, look at this now, right? Here we are 4 years later, and they're just like in complete collapse. And I think what happened is that they were winning overwhelmingly, but they launched the revolution too soon. They needed another generation or two to fully brainwash out the rest of us. They launched too soon. And then you combine that with just atrocious governance, where a whole bunch of people who really weren't politically engaged got politically engaged because they're pissed off about inflation or illegals or transgender operas and the rest of it, men and women's rooms. Just, I mean, really unforced errors. But at any rate, I think that launching too soon is really critical. The
Yeah.
people were not ready for it. They were not sufficiently brainwashed. They didn't have all of they didn't have control over all of the means of communication. I think Europe is absolutely going to do that because the
Mhm.
reason they launched too soon, I think, the reason why they launched the COVID totalitarian coup was because of Donald Trump and
Yes.
Brexit.
Yep.
That told them, yeah, it made them afraid that they had peaked and that they were losing ground. And they said, if we don't do it now, we'll never be able to do it. The key element to that, I think, was the internet,
yes.
social media specifically, right?
Mhm.
It's very similar to Gutenberg, right? Back in the 1400s. So
Mhm.
the Gutenberg press was imported from China. It had been in China for 600 years. He didn't invent anything, but he brought movable type to Europe. And movable type mattered because it made it much, much cheaper to print pamphlets to
Yep.
communicate, right? So in the old days, you had like a monk sitting there hand copying, right? Doesn't work for a peasant revolt. Now, you print out 10,000 mimeographed pamphlets, you get a couple of riders to take that to the surrounding villages, you have a revolution, right?
Yes.
That is the internet, right?
Yes.
It so reduces the costs of communication and coordination that, I mean, you can launch a revolution on the internet,
I,
right? This
it,
is just shocking.
well, it's funny. And funny you say that because I agree with everything you say. I was actually waiting to make that point to say, like,
Yeah.
yeah, they launched early. They reached for the boob too early on prom night because of Trump and Brexit. Also, because all of their stooges that they bought off were all old, and they could
Yeah.
see the younger generation of politicians and kids. They knew that they could see the generational divide, and it wasn't quite right. So they had to make the move when they did. Agenda 2050 became Agenda 2030, became Agenda 2020. That's what happened. It was a mistake. And it wasn't an unforced error. It was them reading the tea leaves properly and not having, and then going with the army that you'd built.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but to the point about the internet, which is interesting. I've been talking to my daughter a lot about this. Now she grew up. She's 18, is about to turn 19, so she kind of grew up, as with her friends. Certainly during COVID, they all of a sudden they were having school on Zoom, and they were spending all their time on Discord, playing video games together and whatnot, and locked in their homes, and that's what she likes to do anyway. And what's interesting is in recent days, I've been discussing with her what's going on, and I just use her to take a temperature of what's happening. And when I talk to her about them having control over media, she's like, "Dude, they can't lie to us anymore. The truth will eventually get out there because we have so
Yeah.
many ways of talking amongst ourselves." I said, "Yes, that's true, love, but you don't understand the way they seed the information space with to target you indirectly. And then I hear it when I listen to you talk about certain things. I can tell that you don't realize it, but you have been programmed with their talking points, even though you think you believe them yourself. I need you to sit down and watch Standalone Complex, Ghost of the South, and the television show, because it's literally about how you program people through memes and and create informational revolutions this way. It's incredibly important, if to get a like you like anime, honey, you should be watching that.
Hmm.
And It's the same, and this is a thing that I've been like worried about and expecting to happen and been hip to for a long, long time. So yes and no, but that younger generation gets their information from different sources. The problem, and so what we've had in the last 5 to 6 years or 8 years since Trump and Brexit was them trying to figure out how to do end runs around their normal distribution channels because they lost a couple of the big ones, like they lost X to Elon Musk, and then they had to figure out how to get the kids through secondary propagation, secondary and tertiary propagation. And I'll be honest with you, they've been seeding crap into 4chan for years. Um, and
Oh yeah.
um, and
Yeah.
it's not taking because the guys there are too hip to this shit. They can see it coming, and and then they just make fun of it, and then they post all that stuff up on Gab and Twitter and everything else, and it makes its way into the zeitgeist. And
Yeah. And that's why they've been focusing so much on censorship in the first place, right? You know, they always wanted to silence us, but why did it become so important for them all of a sudden? And the reason is because they saw exactly what happened. Trump, Brexit, Trump version 2.0. And once you lose one, so like once they lost Elon, who was a former Democrat, by the way. So that's another fascinating angle, right? Is that the we and that goes back to the cheating, right? When you ignore your voters and then you cater to the elite, and well, Elon was one of those voters. Uh, Joe Rogan was one of those voters, right? So a lot of these guys are coming over to Trump, not necessarily a Republican Party. They're coming over to Trump because the party abandoned them, and I think that effect is even stronger in Europe. Like when you look at some of these things that are happening in France, and then there's just like no response. I mean, do you guys not know how democracy works? Like, it's weird. Like, I was on their side. I'd be like, "What are you doing?" Yeah.
the French will get there, and when the French, and we all know that when the French throw a party against their government, it gets violent.
Oh, it gets extreme. You look back to like Weimar, for example, when the government lost the people. Even Germans who were famously obedient and whatnot. I mean, they had like murderous gangs on bicycles because there was no gasoline, so they'd go on bicycles, rampaging through the countryside, beating up farmers. I mean, hopefully it doesn't get there. Hopefully it looks more like what we're having in the U.S. now, where it's an organized restoration as opposed to pure chaos. But if they hold it back long enough, then yes, it will get to chaos.
Yeah, I will. So we're all hoping that what I've been telling my European patrons and that portion of the audience, because I will go on my anti-Europe rant, but of course I'm talking about their leadership, not the people. And I say, look,
Mhm.
you know what we're doing in the United States today, and some Europeans get it, and certainly the man from AFD, Rothfuss, understood this directly, and other Europeans that I talked to, like, you in the United States have to win. You have to get the United States under control, and then put the right pressure on Europe here to help liberate us. I'm like, what do you think is happening? Why do you think Trump is talking about making Canada the 51st state, taking Greenland, bankrupting in effect through the LBMA, bankrupting the Bank of England, bringing the dollar home, like, and putting up tariffs and capital controls around the dollar? You guys are not going to be able to live off of our largesse anymore. Let's see how you can stand on your own. And if you can't, and if you can, great. And if you can't, you can't. We know that Russia can. We know that the Chinese can. And I'll be honest with you. I've said this in other podcasts, and I think we'll close it out here. I'm going to throw this idea at you for you to think, for you to chew on. Is I think we're staring at Yalta 2, and that it's going to be Trump, Xi, and Putin, and they're going to carve up the world. And my first bet is going to be when they go, if Trump accepts the invitation to go to Victory in Europe Day in May in Moscow. I think it's going to start there.
I hope not. I don't want the rest of the world. I want to. I want to leave them alone, let them stew in their own juices.
Well, what
But
I mean is to carve the
yeah,
world up into centers of power around the United States, Russia, and China, and then let and we all go our effectively separate ways.
that I love. I like being a Switzerland everybody's afraid of. That's what I want to be. You know, y'all do you, we do us, and just don't fuck with us. I think one of the most fascinating dynamics going forward here over the next couple of months is that in some ways, so Trump beat the Democrats, but now he's on the next boss battle, which is rhinos, right? Congress, basically, congressional Republicans. And I think that what's fascinating there is what we were talking about earlier, how the power has shifted away from institutional media and towards individuals, right? So the people are the media. And I don't think Congress, like most Republicans in office, they started like 15 years ago when like Mitt Romney was the face of the Republican Party. Okay, they are creatures from another country. We don't know who
Mhm.
these people are, right? They're not like us. And so I think that they don't understand that yet. So, like when you see a lot of the behavior out of Congress, they seem to still think that they're in those days when you were absolutely terrified of how the media was going to spin something,
Mhm.
right? You were very, very interested in at least trying not to get on the New York Times bad side. Those days are over,
Right.
right? Like when you look at Trump's support among Republicans is like 95%. It is absolute.
Right.
And I think a lot of these congressmen, that's what they need to get is that you, me, and 1,000 people like us, right? Millions of people on Twitter. This is where the conversation is. This is where they're judged. This is where they're going to face primaries. This is where they're going to lose their job. Nobody cares what the New York Times says. In fact, it's a badge of honor. If you're
Yes.
running for office and the New York Times says some colorful things about you, you would put that on a billboard at this point. It is a changed world and they don't get it yet.
Yeah, no, and Trump and credit to Barron Trump for educating his dad about how important Joe Rogan and this kind of thing
Yeah.
is
Oh, yeah. Well,
because
Barron's really running the country at this point, huh?
yeah. Well, apparently he's a very bright boy.
He
Um
is.
and and father of the snow Mexicans are angry.
The memes are bad.
If you've seen
Yeah.
that meme, it's really
Yeah.
funny. Um,
I will take our memes over the entire legacy media any day of the
yeah,
week.
no, and today and Dave Collins' point on this
Yeah.
podcast and others to me is that the meme lords kept the fires burning during the
Yes.
darkest days and then set
Yeah.
the stage for us. And I have to tip my hat to Dave because I think he's absolutely correct. So, Peter, any final words before we cut out?
I think we fixed everything at this point. We are fucking set for the next 20 years. So
Outstanding. Outstanding. Well, Peter St. Onge, you are Prof. St. Onge on Twitter. Is that correct?
yes, I have a PhD, which is good because then if I say something really stupid, then it's like, a blow against the PhDs of the world. So
Right.
yes, if you think I'm an idiot, I hope you will respect PhDs less. Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Prof. St. Onge, ProfStonge. Put out daily videos on economics and freedom, and then you can also catch them on YouTube and on. I have a Substack at profsatonge.com.
Excellent. So that we'll leave it there. And you guys know where I am at TFL1728 on Twitter. And I still can't call it X. I just can't do it. So with that said, we're out. So you guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.